The man responsible for enforcing America's tax laws just refused to explain why the President of the United States is exempt from them. Scott Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, sat before Congress today and couldn't name a single legal case that barred him from answering. Because there isn't one. What you're about to watch is a cabinet secretary hiding behind a law he couldn't cite, a Supreme Court ruling he didn't know existed, and a Justice Department he kept using as a human shield, until the questions got so precise, so surgical, that the only thing left was to call the Congresswoman asking them a liar. That's not a legal defense. That's what cornered power looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, nice to have you back before our committee. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that all Americans should follow our tax laws?
Yes, Congressman.
Yes, good. So do I. And do you believe that for those Americans who break our tax laws, they should be audited or held accountable?
Well, I think there are two things there. An audit is not a result of breaking the law.
Yes or no? Simple question.
Well, no, it's not a simple question. It's
okay,
a two-part
then
question.
let me break it into two. Do you think they should?
If you're asking me,
please don't
should every
interrupt
taxpayer
me.
be audited?
Please answer I came here for answers. If you came here to waste time, I'm going to try to make sure you don't do that. Do you believe that people who lie on their tax returns should be audited?
Yes.
Okay, do you think that people who break our laws should be held accountable, our tax laws?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Very simple. Not a hard question.
No.
I'm glad we agree. So why is it that you are allowing President Trump to have complete immunity from being audited?
Again, I'm going to have to refer you to my previous statements. And
what was your previous statement, sir?
That I am unable to comment on any of the ongoing litigation.
Okay, can you name the ongoing case concerning President Trump's immunity from audit?
Sorry?
Can you name?
There are three cases.
Can you name them, please?
That are out there now, and I will be happy to get back to you on those, because again, I am not a lawyer.
Okay.
We are represented by the DOJ.
Great. You said that you can't because there's ongoing litigation. You'll get me the name of the ongoing litigation, because the only ongoing litigation that I know of is surrounding the $1.8 million slush fund, which has already been suspended. The fact is that the judge's ruling in the litigation that references that slush fund only addresses the anti-weaponization fund. It doesn't even address Trump's immunity from audit. So I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the judge's order in the Floyd versus Department of Justice case.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, Secretary, you said you're not an attorney, is that correct?
Mercifully.
Okay, well, I am, and I'm actually proud to be an attorney and know the laws, and I know how to read a judicial ruling. Furthermore, I know that since 1962, the Supreme Court has held that ongoing litigation does not prevent someone from testifying in a congressional hearing. So once again, I'm going to ask, why are you allowing President Trump and his family to have complete immunity from being audited?
Again, since you're a lawyer, you will understand that the U.S. Treasury and the IRS are represented by the Justice Department and the acting Attorney General.
Yes, but I just mentioned a Supreme Court case that doesn't bar you from testifying. It's pretty clear to me, though, however, that you're not interested in answering questions. You're interested in arguing. Let me ask you this question. If President Biden amended a prior tax return and claimed that he was owed $1 billion, do you think that that would be audited, or should it be audited?
I'm not going to talk about any
because you're not really here to answer questions. I don't understand why you wouldn't audit that, and I don't understand why you wouldn't do the same for President Trump. So the ruling by the Justice Department,
do you have specific knowledge of an audit of President Trump?
Excuse me. It's my time. You're not here to ask me questions. I'm here to ask you questions, and hopefully you're here to try to answer some of them. I'm curious to know who counts as Trump's family for the purposes of this immunity. Is it his children, his in-laws, his grandchildren, his second or third cousin, his great-great-grandchildren? Do you know the answer to that question, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I imagine you have the Justice Department phone number. I would suggest you call them.
I'm not the one that runs the Department of the Treasury or that oversees what is happening with this immunity has been granted.
I'm not the one either. We follow the instructions of our lawyers, and we obey the law, Representative.
I hope that you're proud of your performance today, Mr. Secretary, because
I hope you get some social media
I think it's pretty
clips.
safe to say that this is probably the most corrupt Treasury Department in our nation's history. And while you dance around questions to protect Trump, Americans are suffering in Trump's spiraling economy. Inflation is now rising faster than average hourly wages. Gas prices are at an all-time high with the war in Iran. The cost of groceries has risen 3.2% over the past years, and prices on most goods have gone up because of Trump's tariffs. So I don't see how you could call that anything other than a failure of the most corrupt Treasury Department in history.
Your time has expired, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Secretary, I would love for you to respond to the accusations at your department, because I think you are due the opportunity for that.
The Congresswoman is slanderous. She has nothing but the unsubstantiated opinions, and I will not stand for that. There is nothing corrupt. We move at the highest levels, and just because she cannot get the answer she wants, if she would like to give me facts, she seems long on facts, short on facts, long on hot air, and I will not stand for that. Yeah, that's great.
Mr. Arrington is recognized.
Disgrace to make a remark like that.
Apparently, my colleagues had a sudden interest in the rule of law. I wonder if you asked her if she thought illegal immigrants should be detained and deported or caught and released, what the answer would be.
Well, and Congressman, and two, on inflation, I am not going to take firefighting advice from an arsonist.
Well, Mr. Secretary,
they torch the American people.
Mr. Secretary, maybe we ought to ask the question: should the sons of presidents who have multiple felony convictions, should they be held to the same standard of the American people in terms of crime and punishment? I wonder what the answer to that question would be. Let's not veer off. Apparently, wages and take-home pay aren't the only thing up in this country. Irony and hypocrisy is at an all-time high among my Democrat colleagues.
Now we see why someone leaves California every 2 minutes.
And that hypocrisy and irony starts with questions about price increases. It was the failed economic policies, one self-inflicted failed economic policy after the other, that created the worst inflation crisis in a half a century.
Let me tell you what Bessent's line of questioning did, and more importantly, what it revealed. Sanchez came in with 3 moves, not one. First, she forced a factual confession. Yes, tax cheats should be audited. Yes, lawbreakers should be held accountable. Second, she exposed a legal bluff that the Secretary of the Treasury was clearly hoping nobody would call. Third, and this is the part that should stay with you, she tied those 2 things together into a question that has no clean answer. If those principles are true for every American, why do they stop at the Oval Office door? Now let's talk about that legal bluff, because it's doing a lot of work here and most people aren't going to catch it. Bessent kept saying he couldn't comment because of ongoing litigation. That sounds reasonable until you ask the obvious follow-up. What litigation exactly? Sanchez asked. He couldn't name it. And I want you to understand what that means, because it's not a minor stumble. It means the Secretary of the Treasury sat before Congress, invoked a legal restriction as his shield, and could not identify that restriction when directly challenged. Sanchez then landed the legal punch that should have ended the evasion entirely. A 1962 Supreme Court precedent establishing that ongoing litigation does not bar a witness from testifying before Congress. Not a technicality she invented on the spot. A 6-decade-old Supreme Court ruling. Bessent's response was to keep pointing at the Justice Department. And here is the thing about that move. It isn't a legal defense. It's a ventriloquist act. He's saying, "Don't ask me, ask the lawyers," while sitting in the chair of the one person in the country most responsible for how tax law gets enforced. Let me explain why the underlying policy matters, because audit immunity sounds like a bureaucratic abstraction, and it absolutely is not. The IRS has a mandatory audit program specifically for sitting presidents and vice presidents. It has existed since 1977. It was built for one reason. A president has more influence over federal tax policy, IRS leadership, and federal spending than any other single person in the country. Automatic audits are the guardrail that exists precisely to prevent that influence from being quietly converted into personal financial protection. That guardrail appears to have been removed for Trump. Not by any law Bessent could cite, not by any court ruling he could name. By a Justice Department directive he kept referencing without ever being able to explain. Think about what that means in practice. The program built to ensure that the most powerful person in the country faces the same tax scrutiny as everyone else has been suspended. And the man who runs the agency overseeing that program cannot tell Congress why, cannot tell them where the authority comes from, and cannot tell them who else it covers. That is not an administrative detail. That is the entire question of whether the law applies equally, dressed up in procedural language and presented as something too complicated to explain in a hearing room. There is one more thing worth naming before we move on, and it has to do with how Bessent framed his ignorance. He kept saying, "I'm not a lawyer." "I am not a lawyer either" was his actual line at one point, and I understand why that sounds humble. But the Secretary of the Treasury does not need to be a lawyer to know the name of the legal case his own department is operating under. He does not need a law degree to pick up the phone and ask his general counsel before walking into a congressional hearing and invoking ongoing litigation as his defense. The "I'm not a lawyer" framing is designed to make ignorance sound like modesty. It isn't modesty. It is a choice not to know, because knowing would require answering. Now let's talk about the whataboutism, because it showed up exactly on schedule. The moment Sanchez's time expired, a Republican colleague stood up and asked whether we should be talking about Hunter Biden and illegal immigrants. I've seen this move so many times I can almost set a timer for it. When the defense of a position runs out, the conversation gets changed. Not because the new topic is relevant, because the old topic is dangerous. The Hunter Biden pivot isn't an argument, it's an exit ramp. And the fact that Bessent himself needed rescuing by a whataboutism after calling Sanchez slanderous tells you exactly how the exchange actually went. When someone shifts from defending their position to attacking the person asking the question, they have run out of position to defend. When they then need a colleague to change the subject entirely, they have run out of room. That sequence, evasion, insult, rescue, is not what a confident, legally grounded defense looks like. It is what cornered power looks like. Let me bring this down to something concrete because I think this is where it actually matters. If you or I amended our tax return tomorrow and claimed we were owed $1 billion, the IRS would not shrug and say there might be some ongoing litigation, let's leave it. We would hear from them. Quickly. The people who have the most influence over whether we hear from them, though, the President, the Treasury Secretary, the IRS Commissioner, those people are now apparently operating under a different set of rules. Rules nobody can name. Rules nobody can explain. Rules that seem to exist specifically for the people best positioned to benefit from them. Here is what that does to the system, and this is important. Career IRS agents are watching this. Treasury officials are watching this. Future administrations are watching this. And the signal they are all receiving is the same. Accountability is optional for the right people, and the right people will not be asked to justify that in any terms you can actually verify. That is not just a problem for this president or this audit or this hearing. That is a template, a blueprint for how to place a political class above the enforcement mechanisms that were designed specifically to keep them in check. The mandatory audit program wasn't built because Congress assumed presidents were corrupt. It was built because they understood that power without scrutiny is an invitation, and that invitations eventually get accepted. What Sanchez exposed today isn't just a Treasury Secretary who couldn't answer a question. It's a system that has quietly decided some questions don't need to be answered. And the people most invested in keeping it that way are betting that you'll move on before anyone finds out what those questions were actually protecting. Don't.